Hey there, welcome to Just Need Water. For a while now, Kelly and I have been looking to upgrade our cabin cruiser, and after 6 months of searching, we finally found her. So I decided to make this video and talk about how we narrowed down the field. So if that's of interest to you, let's get to it. Alright, so before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about the purpose of this channel. I created this channel really to capture the activities my wife Kelly and I just love doing every weekend or every chance we get. That's everything from cruising on our cabin cruiser to taking the jet skis out, local lakes, the ocean, wherever we can get out to even cruising on commercial cruise ships, as well as a little fishing. So I hope to cover a lot of that content coming up in the future. But before we do that, let's cover today's video. And the first thing you really need to think about is, what is the purpose of your new boat? How do you intend to use it? Is it something that you plan on just taking out for a day, a weekend, or spending a little more time on? That'll really help narrow the focus. So before I cover what we were looking for in our new boat, it may help to cover the boat that we're currently in. So we have a 2003 Four Winds 348 Vista. Boat's been beautiful to us. We absolutely love it. We spend every weekend on it if we could. It's a 37-footer. It's got a 12-foot beam. It's got twin 6.2 Merc cruisers with a set of V-drives in it. Full enclosure, although we normally don't have the enclosure on it during the summer months. AC unit, reverse heat in there, genset in there. Really has treated us well. We're simply looking for something a little bit bigger. But additional details is there's a sleeping area up front that you have a little privacy. You can pull a curtain in it. The inside cabin has got plenty of space for a couple of people to move around in. And then as you get into the cockpit area, it's all open with a huge back table and a space to grill on the rear. We've really spent countless summers on this thing and enjoyed it with quite a few friends on the boat. But as nice as this boat is, for us, when you add two dogs, it really is just a weekender. And we wanted something a little bit bigger that we can ultimately spend maybe up to a month or two on. So this is a perfect boat for a perfect time of our lives when we were just spending weekends. But now that we were looking to do a longer time, a week to a month to maybe 2 months, it's time to upgrade. All right, so when it comes to buying a cabin cruiser in that 40 to say 48 foot range, which was the range that we were looking at, one of the dilemmas you come across is gas versus diesel. Originally, we were actually looking at gas engines. They're significantly cheaper. I know how to maintain a gas engine. I've worked on them all my life. When it comes to diesel, I really don't know too much about it. So we were leaning towards gas engines. And as I had two boats that we were strongly considering, we actually hired a consultant to help us through this process. And as the consultant understood our needs, which is to eventually take this to the Bahamas, do longer trips, the longevity of it, he really strongly encouraged us to go with diesel engines. So here we are 2-3 months into the process, and we completely switched gears and went to diesel engines. Now, diesel concerned me a bit. I wasn't familiar with it, never did an oil change at that time. I've since done an oil change on two main engines and a generator. It's not that bad. Understand the longevity of them, but again, just didn't have the experience with it. But with YouTube nowadays, that experience comes easier and easier, and I feel really comfortable with the purchase of what we did going forward with diesel engines. The other thing with diesel engines is the amount of hours on it. As it was explained to me, it's not necessarily the number of hours. Actually, low hours in some cases could be worse off for the engine. It's when those hours are actually being used. You want a diesel engine to be well lubricated, and if the engine just sits there inside the cylinders, they eventually start pitting and corrosion happens, and that's where you start running into problems. Whereas if a diesel engine is used on a regular basis, even if it's slightly higher hours, the engine remains more well lubed, less chance of corrosion, less chance or better chance of longevity. At least that's how it was explained to me. Still, we were trying to remain under 2,000 hours for diesel engines, and happy to find out that we found something that met our needs. The next area we looked at was the number of cabins that we wanted, and we actually evolved a little bit on this. I would say from the get-go, we knew we wanted a minimum of 2 cabins, but where they were located and how they were laid out changed over time. First off, storage was very important, not only for the master cabin, but also for the guest cabin. We wanted to make sure there was enough storage that for our guests that they can take 2 carry-ons worth of clothing, and there was a hanging locker and there was space for them to put their stuff in. As for the master cabin, we were looking for a little more storage space because our intent again is to take this out for a month or 2 at a time. So storage space in the cabins was pretty important. The next area was the bed layout. For the master cabin, we absolutely wanted the ability for you to walk around. In our current boat, you kind of got to crawl over each other if one needs to get up in the middle of the night. So a walk-around bed was a must. As we started looking at guest cabins, a walk-around also became a must-have for us. We just didn't want bunk beds, or we didn't want the ability of one guest having to crawl over the other. I'm blessed. Both my parents and my in-laws are still with us. Would love to take them out on this thing. And I want to make sure it was easy for them as well to get in and out of the bed and stuff. So cabin layout is important, and there are plenty of different options out there. I know folks that have kids may be looking for a bunk bed option or something that sleeps 2 or even 3 in the bow of the cabin. The other thing was I looked at certain boats that were 3 cabins. They were beautiful boats, and they would have worked out really well if they would have fit in my budget. Unfortunately, it was a little bit much of a stretch, and we had to bow out of those particular options. The last thing I'll say about cabins is we wanted solid doors for both the guest cabin and the main cabin. And as we looked at different boats, we realized that the layout of the cabins was important as well. And what I mean by there is more along the lines of the placement. We wanted separation from the guest cabin and the master cabin. And that's really what basically brought us to a aft cabin layout, where primarily your guest cabin is in the bow of the boat and your master cabin is all the way in the aft of the boat. That is ultimately what we ended up with, and there's typically a salon in between with plenty of separation. That floor plan is what worked for us. Pretty happy with it. What works for you? Let me know in the comments below. So now that our cabin layout has been decided for us, the next area we looked at was the heads. And the first question you have to ask yourself, is it a wet head or a dry head acceptable? And for us, originally we leaned with a wet head would be acceptable for the guest area, but we absolutely wanted a dry head for the main quarters. If you're not familiar with what a wet head is typically an area where the toilet and the shower is in the same space, and usually there's a curtain that comes around. So if you're going to shower in there and then somebody else comes in after you to use the head or to use the sink, potentially a little soggy in there. Versus a dry head has 2 separate areas, either a curtain or a glass door that separates the sink and toilet area from the shower area. In some boats, they actually separate the 2 where they're in 2 separate rooms. That is an awesome feature. The best feature of one of the boats that we looked at that I absolutely loved is where the sink for the master cabin was actually out in the master cabin area, and then there was a separate room for the head unit and a separate room for the shower unit. Unfortunately, that's not the boat that we ended up with, but that was a really nice feature. So with our cabin layout decided and our head layout decided, the next thing that we focused on was the helm station and the helm area or the cockpit area. From there, we wanted your basic electronics. I was looking for a radar unit there. I was looking for a fish finder would be nice, but at least a depth finder. I wanted autopilot in the unit, although it looks like you can add, in some cases, you can add them fairly inexpensively if you had to. But the biggest thing for me was the layout of the floor plan and the seating area, especially for Kelly. I looked at a couple of boats where the seating was a little bit tight. It was more of bench seating. You were sitting upright. Didn't really look like there was a comfortable space for one to lounge, say with two dogs in our lap while we were underway. So that was really important for us. The other thing was room for friends, where they would actually be able to sit comfortably as well. Not just for one individual, but multiple people. But more importantly, I didn't want to feel like the captain was removed from the other friends that would be joining us. Some of the boats that we looked at basically had two tiers of seating area. So there was a minimalistic area of seating up by the helm, and there was additional seating, say 4 or 5 steps below towards the aft of the boat. While that would have worked, I'm happy to say the boat that we actually ended up with only has 1 step in between that area, so it's more like one combined unit. So it doesn't feel like the captain is away from the company and you're all more grouped collectively together. Now, I will also say there were other boats that we looked at where the helm station had plenty of extra seating for guests up there, as well as low below on, say, your mid layer. So that was important for us, but top area was making sure that Kelly had a space that she was comfortable for long voyages and to kick back, put her feet up. Dogs had a space to sit. That was the next area of importance for us. Other things that we looked at and took into consideration were things like, is the boat Great Loop capable? While I don't believe I plan on doing the Great Loop, although things could change, for resale value and for other purposes, namely bridge clearance height, getting a boat that was Great Loop capable was very important to us and something that we ended up using as a requirement. Another thing is I do plan on taking it down to the Bahamas and the Keys where it's very shallow in certain areas. So the draft was important to us. So we were looking at a draft of 4 feet or less. Happy to say the boat we ended up with was 3 feet 6 inches. So that's exactly pretty darn perfect as to where we wanted to be. I wanted room for solar panels as well. Either minimum of 2. Now they can be sometimes placed on a radar arch. I've seen adapters and brackets where you can put it on your bimini top, and I've also seen other boats that had a hard top, especially in the rear, that had plenty of space to basically put a couple solar panels on there. So a minimum of 2 solar panels, getting them up there in the future, adding an inverter or so forth, that was important to us as well. Also wanted space for a dinghy. A Dinghy Davit system, or even a crane if we absolutely had to. Don't plan on getting a large dinghy, but for Kelly and I and 2 dogs, I needed something small enough that once we start taking it on the intercoastal, eventually the Bahamas, we had a means of access to get to land without actually having to stay at a dock. So dinghy or space with it for a dinghy was important for us as well. We also wanted a good size fridge and freezer in the boat. Now, some of the units that we looked at, their fridge was kind of like a dorm size fridge with minimalistic space for freezer space. Now, we may potentially have let that slide because you could always get these external coolers that are 12 volt, plug in, and you could get additional freezer space. But ideally, we were trying to find something that was closer to full size. Now, they're nowhere near the size of, say, a full size in your home, or at least not in my home, but they are full size compared to a camper. So you have a pretty large refrigerator space and another additional freezer space either below or above. The one we ended up with has a good size freezer space above. And when we do those larger, or I should say longer monthly trips, we probably will get an additional plug-in 12-volt freezer just to have additional items stored in there. The area that we took into consideration as a requirement was the bow space. We absolutely wanted space to lay down on the bow, not just seating up there, but to actually lay a towel down, a yoga mat, if it didn't have sun pads, and actually stretch out and lay down. So the bow area was important to us. When Kelly and I go out spending weekends out, we tend to enjoy, and I know, you're not supposed to lay in the sun, but that's one of the things we just enjoy doing. And yes, we wear sunblock. But the other thing is not just bow space, but accessing the bow. Think about it. When you go and look at these boats, they're sitting there at a dock, stationary. It's not rocking. It's fairly stable. Walking up and back to the bow is pretty darn easy at that. But if you're in rougher conditions, if you picture it in your mind, what would that be like? Are the rails high enough? Are there places to grab? Would you feel comfortable doing it in a storm if you absolutely had to? So those are things that we took into consideration. I will say we looked at a few Silvertons. Silvertons were beautiful. They were a little top heavy for my taste, and the floor plans just didn't work out for us. But when it came to accessing the bow, loved the way they had their front stairwell that basically went down to the bow. But I think we found a pretty good happy second. So the last area we're going to talk about are those nice to have things that some boats have that are just icing on the cake. First one I would say is an inverter system. Something that ultimately I will want to add to our boat. I not necessarily know that I would want something that would run the AC units, but definitely something that is strong enough to power the rest of the fridge, some of the other ice makers, some of the TVs and so forth. And let's just say have most of the boat under power, with the exception of the AC units. If I can pull it off and get one big enough that'll at least run one AC unit, that's absolutely something that I would look to do. But that's in the future, somewhere probably a couple of years down the line. I don't necessarily need it today. The next thing was a water maker. For those times that we actually go to the Bahamas, it would have been real nice to have a water maker installed in the unit. I've seen them run from anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 just for the units themselves. Actually, they go on as high as 10 grand for some of them that are high capacity, but that is something I may take into consideration in the future. So if it had a water maker in there, yeah, it would have been real nice. Definitely would have been icing on the cake. Final thing was, I would say, a washer dryer combo unit. And I'm going to say that was probably, space for one of those was probably a mandatory requirement for us, but the unit itself didn't necessarily have to be there, but I needed a place to actually put one. That was something that if we were going to be out for a month or two at a time, we wanted the ability to do laundry while we were out there. So having a smaller washer dryer combo unit, the unit itself was a nice to have, but it absolutely needed to have the space where I could add one at a later date. So that was important to us. Our boat does have one built in from the factory. I did use it, just did a small load of, maybe a load of laundry from a couple of days. It did a pretty decent job of washing it and drying it. I do hear if you overload them, they take forever to dry and they're not made for loading large loads. But think about it, if you're especially down south, summer months, what are you washing? T-shirts, shorts, and stuff? Should be easy enough to handle that if you're doing it on a regular basis. So that is going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below. If there's any corrections, anything I misspoke, because I am still learning, again, don't be harsh, but feel free to drop a comment below as well, and I'll do the best I can to answer them. With that, look forward to seeing you on future videos. Thank you and have a great day.